Hello, this is Michael. Today I'm going to make another random video to practice talking. I'm going to tell you about this unusual bread that I made from scratch. I've been experimenting with making random mixtures of vital wheat gluten and some other flour. This is just vital wheat gluten, buckwheat flour, filtered water, active dry yeast, and I added anise to this. You don't have to add the ground anise. This whole anise seed. You don't have to add the anise. You can experiment with other spices, cinnamon, or whatever. But I did not add these ingredients. No milk, or maybe some people would say milk with an I. Milk. Maybe milk's a Michigan pronunciation. No milk, no eggs, no sweeteners, no oil, and no salt. So sweeteners would be like white sugar, brown sugar, honey, molasses, maple syrup, brown rice syrup, and weird stuff like Splenda, sucralose, or whatever. And no oils. Oils probably really aren't that great for you. I mean, I know you do need a certain amount of fat. It's just that the actual amount people think they need is probably greater than what you actually need. And then for salt, because I vaguely remember that I used to sprinkle salt on a lot of stuff. Like when I was a kid, my mother tried serving me potatoes and I wouldn't eat them, but I would eat rice, but I wouldn't eat the rice unless I could put salt on it. And my mother does the same thing. She can eat rice, but she only will eat it if she's supposed to put salt on it. But salt actually raises your blood pressure and puts stress in your kidneys. And if you go to the grocery store or any store that sells bread and you look at all the ingredients in all the bread, you see that they all have salt. I swear, like, it's in every bread. It's a myth that you have to add salt. Like, I proved that you can make bread without salt. Now, obviously this is unusual. It's not in, like, slices. It doesn't look like sandwich bread. I cut it into wedges. It came out in a big disc shape. And that, what, I did a no-knead technique. I did some minimal amount of math, so you could either pick the total amount of flour you're going to add, multiply it by like a certain percent. Like I figured out that maybe 13 to 14% vital wheat gluten. You could multiply the amount you want by 0.14, add that amount of vital wheat gluten, and then add enough buckwheat flour to make the weight go up to whatever you decided was the total. Or you could even try sorghum flour or something else. And then, but like you could also make a ratio, like whatever amount of buckwheat flour you want is like 86% of the total. And then how many ounces of the, what would the total be? I don't know. Like if you want to make it like 20 ounces of buckwheat flour, then you would maybe 100 minus 14 is 86, and then divide 20 by 0.86, and then you get a certain number, and then from that number subtract 20, and then you would get the amount of vital wheat gluten to add. But you can do any amount. You could try 10 ounces, 12 ounces. I don't know how small you can make it. I don't know how big you could make it. And then for the yeast, I bought this little jar of active dry yeast. It was right next to the flour. It was in the baking ingredient section. Actually, I bought the buckwheat flour at a South Asian store. And I bought the yeast at a generic, non-ethically marked store, and it came in a little jar. It's called active dry yeast. It might have been $3.99. It was the store brand of the yeast, and I sort of roughly figured out maybe 1/8 of a teaspoon for every 4 or 5 ounces. So I actually used this scale to weigh the ingredients. So some opinions say that there's an advantage to weighing the ingredients. A lot of recipes say to measure according to volume. I do have these volume measuring devices, but it's been a long time since I've used them. Maybe I'll never use them again. For the amount of yeast, I just used a measuring spoon, although I guess you could weigh it too. And this is a good scale. I bought this on eBay. The scale that I had another scale that I bought at a store, and it was garbage because when you turn it on, you had to push and hold it to turn on, and it took too long to turn on, and I was having trouble turning it off. But with this scale, you just push the button and let it go, and then it turns on. But and you can set it to measure in ounces, and then I added the dry ingredients, and then I added the water. For the water, you can experiment with how much water you should add. I read that no-knead water is supposed to be like 75%. There's this thing called baker's ratios. Whatever weight the flour is, if you want it to be like 75% hydration, you just weigh the flour, and then whatever weight that is, 75% of that would be the weight of the water. But I find that the more water I add, the easier it is to mix. I made this 100%. So actually I did make the amount of buckwheat flour 16 ounces because that was half the package. The package was 32 ounces. It was 2 pounds. I added half the package. I weighed it, and then I added the vital wheat gluten, and then I added the same weight of water. But you can experiment with more or less water. But the more water you add, the easier it is to mix. But then the more water you add, the more water has to be released as steam when you bake it. And then, you probably want parchment paper. I used parchment paper after I mixed the ingredient. After I mixed it all, first I mixed the dry ingredients. It took like 10 seconds, and then I mixed in the water, and that's the part that takes the most effort. But after I mixed it, I got a second container with a tight-fitting lid, lined that with the parchment paper, then put the batter or dough on the parchment paper, then sealed on the lid, and then waited for more than half a day. So I'm trying to do this in a no-knead technique. So in no-knead bread, you don't knead it. Like, you don't manipulate it with your hands. You mix it with a spoon, and then you just let it rise for a long time, like maybe 12 to 18 hours. And once it's risen, it doesn't matter if you wait like a few more minutes to a few more hours before you bake it. And then when I baked it, all the other times I baked it, I used a slow cooker because my apartment had a gas stove, and afraid burning natural gas in an enclosed space is going to release a small amount of fumes. I moved to an apartment that has an electric stove. I don't think burning an electric stove should be a problem. There's no open flame. Now, a lot of opinions say to bake bread in a Dutch oven. If you use a Dutch oven, that would like make the moisture not evaporate, and then I guess the water is gonna transfer more heat to the dough, and it's gonna make it get a thicker crust. I don't want the kind of crust that's gonna break my teeth. I really don't like a lot of crust, so this actually worked. I've only used this oven once so far, and I baked it on this sheet, but I just pulled the dough out by the parchment paper and set it down on this 13-inch diameter aluminum tray, and it worked, but I turned the oven to 275. And the reason I picked 275 is I guessed, and it worked okay. But I didn't want it to get burned. A lot of opinions say to bake bread at like 350 to 450 or more, maybe 325. But I didn't want it to get all burned or toasted, and I didn't want a lot of crust. And it didn't come out with a lot of crust. It was almost too moist, but it's edible. So I baked it for 50 minutes, I guessed, and it came out okay. That's approximately how I made the dough. If you add a lot of water, it's probably not going to rise upwards. It's just going to get a bubbly, and it's going to sort of spread apart a lot. I told you it's weird, because you would think that bread dough is supposed to rise, but this dough is more like, almost like a batter, and it's spread apart to fill up the volume of the container I let it rise in. But it still was dense, but it had a bread-like texture, so it worked better than I expected. Alright, so you can feel free to tell me if you try this or something similar. Thanks.